Perfect.
You are all set.
So, can I start?
Yep.
Okay.
Fine.
So, thanks all for attending this class, and thanks, Andres, for the invitation. So today is Sediment Day. So we talk about sediment modeling with CROCO, and as you will see, we'll mainly talk about non-cohesive sediment. I will explain why. And those talk will be given by myself and Guillaume Morvan. So Guillaume and I were working at Legos. Maybe you begin to know Legos. It's a laboratory in south of France, in Toulouse. And it's a laboratory involved in modeling and also measurement, direct measurement or satellite measurements. And myself, I'm part of the CROCO developers on the wild for different things. And but my research interests are more nearshore modeling. So that's why I get naturally interested in sediment modeling. I'm not a sediment expert in the first place, but when doing nearshore modeling, you quickly need to do also sediment modeling. So we have today 3 presentations. First one is Introduction to Sediment Transport. So it's a presentation I will give. In this presentation, I won't talk at all about CROCO. Actually, it's just to give you some elements about sediment if you don't have any knowledge. If you have already an advanced knowledge, it may not be super interesting, but to be in the mode of doing sediment. In the second one, I will go into CROCO and explain how everything is implemented in CROCO, and give some equation, an example of how to use. And the last one is maybe the most interesting. It will be given by Guillaume, who will go through the different test cases and show slowly what you have to do in terms of input file, for which purpose you can use it, and so on. And then there is an hands-on session with Guillaume, Andres, and I try to be there also. So about sediment dynamics, so I will talk about sediment or sand and sediment transport. And I will begin to give some definitions on this. Then I will talk about the different modes of sediment transport and make the distinction between cross-shore transport. I mean, by cross-shore, I mean transport in the direction of the crest of the wave, and longshore transport. And by this, I mean transport along the coast. And I have a few words about the sediment balance at the end. So in terms of background, so we can characterize the different sediment by their grain size, going from a very fine sediment like clay with a few micron of diameter toward gravels with a diameter of centimeters. And we are with CROCO, and in this talk, we are more interested in what is in the middle, in sand sediment. So it's sediment we will call coarse sediment with a diameter around 0.5 millimeter or something like this. And what we can see, what we can notice from this is that cohesive sediment like argile, clay, I'm not talking about this because my talk is focused on nearshore modeling. By nearshore, I mean with the energetic environment due to waves. And in this area, the fine grain, due to the energy, the fine grain tends to stay in a suspension, and they won't deposit inside the surf area, but they will deposit when the flow is less energetic, so in the estuary, offshore, and so on. So I'll focus from this kind of sediment, so from 100 micron to a few centimeters, which in the near shore will be eroded and then deposit in other places. And those sediments will be set in motion by the mean flow, so the usual mean flow, but mostly by waves. So that's why I will talk a lot about waves in this talk, but I think you already had the Swain talk about waves. And you have also, so by erosion and deposition, with erosion and deposition, you have cross-shore and longshore exchanges of sand. So the global context, I said, is sand beaches and waves. And so by transport of sediments, we can distinguish two processes. So one process lead to a transport toward the beach or offshore. So it's what we call the cross-shore transport. And one process moves sediment along shore, so parallel to the coast. And both occur simultaneously, but the process leading to this transport are very, very different. And you can easily imagine why. If you imagine a beach, you have a large variation cross-shore of topography and of wave, which at the first order you don't have in the along-shore direction. And generally, there are very little erosion and transport by unidirectional current, by unidirectional, I mean mean flow, except in some cases like whip current, I have an example later, or very strong longshore drift. But instead of this, we have a motion which is impulsed by oscillatory currents due to wave, so due to the wave orbital velocities. And we have also motion initiated by wave breaking turbulence. And the transport by mean flow can be done by undertow, subdrift, and can be also driven by wind. So I will explain this a little more later. And the net transport of sediment is the balance of all. So we can make a budget of sediments. So you have a transport which is generated by incident waves, which are generated offshore. You have transport induced by wind and transport induced by residual or tidal flows. So there are different ways for the sediment to be transported. So the first one doesn't happen in the water column by itself. It's a transport in contact with the bed by rolling, sliding. It's what we can see in the picture upright. So it's exactly what happens, for instance, if you think to a river with gravels and stone. The sediment layer in contact with water will prove a certain stress and will be moved just by entrainment by the water or by very little jump, like it's the move number 2. And this happens a lot during storms, when there is a very strong stress at the bottom and also in the breaking area. And this process is the one leading to the generation of ripples. So ripples is the pictures you can see. It's also what you can notice if you're going at the sea. You have this small ripple appearing, and it is due, and they are due to orbital velocities or waves. And you can also have a very big ripple, like submarine dune, for instance. And the ripple can also be generated by vortex due to wave breaking. So it's what you can see with both pictures at the bottom. So the one of the left is generated by orbital waves, orbital velocity of waves, and the one of the right is generated by breaking. But this phenomenon is very hard to measure. There's a large uncertainty. There is no consensus of the magnitude of this effect. And since it's very hard to measure, it's very hard to model. We model it in CROCO. You will show this later, but it's very difficult. The validation of this is very difficult. So this transport, just for a summary, this transport doesn't happen in the water column by itself. So then there is, for erosion, one concept which matters, the concept of boundary layer and shear stress. So the boundary layer is the layer at the bottom where the flow velocity is increasing from the bed to a depth when it becomes constant. And this boundary layer in the nearshore area has variation all along a wave period, as you can see with the picture with a single wave. And this shear stress will be a maximum under a crest and trough of the wave. It's something which is homogeneous. The stress will be more or less equal to the vertical derivative of the velocity. And this stress will be the driver for erosion of the sediment. And then sediment will get the water column and transport by current. So this shear stress we can derive it from the slope of the velocity profile. And if we consider a mean flow, we got something like a sheet flow, a permanent thick boundary layer. But on a wave cycle, this shear stress, as you can see here, it will increase and diminish, and will be max under trough and crest. And we will have also a lot of turbulence and reversal of the different current. And this has an effect on measurement and modeling because, again, it's very difficult to measure. You can measure the stress due to mean flow. It's much more difficult to measure the one during a wave cycle because the average does not mean a lot. So very often we use the maximum orbital velocity that we can derive from the linear theory. And from this, we can have an estimation of the shear stress based on the orbital velocity and the wave frequency and the wave friction. And the wave friction is something, it's still a topic of interest actually, and there are only empirical formulas, but it's something which varies like constant, which is called the Nicolas-de constant, or this Ks, and the sediment diameter, the D0 you can see. So the sediment diameter, sediment size, which play a huge role in the capacity of sediment to be eroded. It's a pretty intuitive actually. So another definition, so it's the shield number. So as you know, in ocean or in physics in general, you've got these adimensional numbers for the characterization of the flow or different phenomena. So you know, I think the Reynolds parameter, which is the ratio between inertia and viscosity, and which give a characterization of a fluid instability. So the higher it is, the more turbulent is a fluid. And for sediment modeling, we have a shield parameters. Rachid was a physicist, which is a ratio between the drag and the gravity. And it gives a kind of critical threshold above which the sediment will be able to be eroded. So it's so what you can see here. It's called the shield graph. So above you can see. So in the x direction you got the Reynolds particle number. So from the left to the right, you got very light sediment and sand and gravel. And on the y direction, it is the shield parameters. So under the red curve, there is no motion of the sediment, there is no erosion. And then above, you will have some motion of the sediment, first bed load and then suspended load. And as you can see that the lowest shield stress appear in the sand range because the sand has a small mass compared to gravel, but the particles are too large for adhesion. So there is no compaction of the sand, so it's pretty easy for erosion. When for silt, it is very small and very light, but the critical shear of motion is higher because there is coagulation of the silt in RGL and so on, and it becomes more complicated to erode. And at the end, it's not very interesting for us, but for gravel, you have a shield stress which is constant and where turbulence of the fluid does not play any role. It's also pretty intuitive. And another definition is cohesive and non-cohesive particles. So particle displacement is subject to their weight and to some drag force. And we will see when we are going to CROCO modeling that each particle has a so-called settling velocity. So it is affected vertically by the flow, but also by gravity. And so this fall velocity can have a different form. And we talk about non-cohesive particle by opposition to cohesive particles, which can aggregate together to form bigger particles. And in our case, for some particles, there is no aggregation, there is no flocculation, so there is no creation of heavier particles. Something I'll come back later also with the description of CROCO. And another description is the notion of depth of closure. So it's the depth offshore, beyond which there is no more erosion, or there is no more erosion because there is no effect of the wave on the seabed. So at this area, there is still some transport of the sediment, because some sediment can be exported from the shore, but there is almost no erosion at this point. And this is here an example. So for medium sand, so for coarse sediment, it is, well, I would say the depth of closure is smaller than from lighter sediment, because it's a bit more difficult to erode. And we will see there, we'll see this later, we'll give also an example of what happened all along the beach profile. And so I will come back on waves. So description of what happened, what kind of waves we can have. So from on the left, we are offshore. On the right, we are on the beach. So offshore, we got sinusoidal waves, so waves which are generated far away and which are propagating, so this is swell. But when waves begin to fill the bottom, there are no sinusoidal anymore. They become to be skewed, and then when they fill a lot the bottom, they become to be very asymmetric before breaking. And this matters a lot. The shape of the wave will matter a lot in the way the sediment will be eroded and redistributed, because this shape of the wave will impact also the shape of the orbital velocity. So, as a summary for sediment and waves, so when the wave are able to see the seabed, so when the shape of the wave is changing, and when the velocity of the waves is changing, the same sediment will begin to be in motion, and the waves also tends to steer the sediment. And in terms of transport mode, so there are several transport modes. So there's this bed load phenomenon, so which is due to grain-to-grain interaction, so where the sediment is moving, but by rolling, is not in the water column. So there is also transport in the water column by what is called suspended load, and where the sediment experiments the effect of turbulence to set it in motion versus gravity, when gravity will tend to do a deposition. It can be transported by both mean flows and waves. And so there are two ways, again, there are two ways of transportation, cross-shore motion and longshore motion. So in the slides after, I will describe the different ways, the different drivers of cross-shore motions and a longshore motion. So to come back to the bed load, so bed load happens only on the cross-shore direction. So because bed load is due to the wave orbital velocity, so bed load is aligned in the direction of the crest of the waves. And by bed load, all the moving sediment can be organized in a different shape. Ripples, very small ripples, short ripples, cross ripples, and this variation of shape is related to the wave height and to the water depth. So here again, from left to right. On the left, we got the offshore side. On the right, the beach. So when the wave begins to fill the bottom, we got some regular, some small regular rip. When it becomes irregular, when the shape of the wave is changing, and we got this mega ripple with the shape of cusp when the waves are breaking. And so here again, it's an example. So this is on the right. This is a measurement for experiment in a tank. So in this, sediments are moved by the flow, and then there are measurements using light, and we can see again these different kinds of ripples going from offshore to the near shore. Well, it's more or less here the same thing. So it's just to say that the different shape of the different type of bed load are strongly linked to the wave orbital velocity with a peak for each one. If we measure the number of occurrence of each type of structure at a given waves. So this was for the bed load. And what happened then in the water column? So if we consider sorry, there is a mistake there. The sediment transport Q, which is equal to the velocity dot the concentration. We can do a decomposition of the velocity to a mean flow, a very high frequency velocity due to wave, and a low frequency velocity due to infragravity waves. And if we do the same for the sediment concentration, we can approximate the sediment transport to a mean value due to the mean flow, to a value which is due to the gravity waves, and a value which is due to very low frequency waves. And all of this term will be a player at different places of the bed. So here I have an example. So it's a real beach which is located at the west coast of Africa. So offshore is on the right, and the beach is on the right. So so offshore we have very few sediment motion. Then we have an area where just after A, where we begin to have some bed load happening, still bed load after B, and then we begin to have erosion, suspended load, and a wave breaking with turbulence. So I will go toward. So this is an example of beach profile. That don't look all like this. This is a single bar beach. You may have 2-bar beach, 3-bar beach, low tide terrace beach, but basically those different phenomena happening at those different locations, you will retrieve it, whatever will retrieve them or some of them, whatever the kind of the beach. So I will go toward each location to explain what is happening there. So offshore at location A, there was a measurement of sediment there. So at this point, we are offshore, so the waves do not fill the bottom. So the waves are linear, sinusoidal, and so the bed is inactive. There is no erosion of sediment, so the transport of sediment at this point is 0. It's what we can see. So even if the velocity has a variation, which are due to incoming waves, if we put 2 sensors at different water depths, they experience the same sediment concentration. So there is no net transport at this point, which was expected. So then if we move towards the sun, so at B location, where the wave begin to fill the bed, actually, so we are just after the depth of closure. So here at this point, the wave become to be skewed. So by skewed, I mean there are no more symmetric on the horizontal direction, and we also have ripple on the seabed, and those ripples will interact with the wave. It's what we can see. So when we are on the wave crest, there will be a creation of a vortex because of wave friction in the trough of the ripple. Then when the wave is rolling, there is a reversal of velocity. So the sediment is exported a little offshore, and then when we come back, there is still erosion and sediment export toward the shore. So there is some little export at this point, but which is still pretty low. And if we still move towards the shore, so at C location, so at this point, the wave, they will strongly fill the bottom. So what happened at this point? There are three phenomena. So the bed is flat, there are no more ripples. So it allows a sheet flow to develop. It's what we can see so at the bottom left. So we got this kind of very thin layer of uniform velocity. The wave are still skewed, so they are not symmetric. They are not symmetric, and we also have a bond infragravity waves. So infragravity waves are very low frequency waves, and bond infragravity waves are waves which are due to the propagation of the individual wave envelope. So they are the usual period of gravity waves is around 10 seconds, something like this, and infragravity waves it's more around the minute. And so those infragravity waves have different properties, and they will play a role in the sediment transport. So it's what you can see. You can see there that there is also a gradient of sediment concentration at some point if we compare two different sensors. So the effect of a skewed waves. So at the bottom there is a scheme of a wave with a crest and a trough. So the crest is bigger than the trough, and in the crest we will have a sediment motion with a large concentration of sediment, and the sediment will move in the direction of the wave. So the sediment will move onshore toward the beach, and then in the trough, the velocity is reversed, so the sediment will move offshore. But since the velocity is smaller, there is a very small offshore movement. So this skewed wave will steal and transport sediments, but the overall effect is that we have onshore transport due to the skewness of the wave. And then there is also an effect of infragravity waves. So they transport also the sound, and sediments also steered by those waves. And we have a very large concentration of sediments under the slope of the infragravity waves. So the overall effect, since it's a trough, so the velocity of the infragravity waves is going from the shore to offshore. So we got the overall effect is an offshore transport. So at the end, at this C point, so before the breaking zone, got some onshore transport due to skewness of the wave, some offshore transport to the infragravity wave. So, but at the end, the onshore transport is bigger than the offshore transport. So, means that we have a transport of the sand toward the beach. And then if we move again towards the beach at the location, it is still flat, but this begins to be very shallow. So the wave will begin to break at this location. So we'll still have different phenomena. So the wave here, they become asymmetric. So it means that they are not symmetric anymore in the y direction. And there is also the generation of the undertow. So the undertow is the current we can see at the bottom left. So the wave in breaking is impulsing some acceleration, and there is a return current at the bottom going offshore. And there is also an effect of breakers in terms of turbulence. And the plot on the right is just to show the asymmetry of the waves, which is increasing. So we have a zoom, and the asymmetry of the wave is increasing when we are going more and more to the shore and when the waves are breaking. So for the effect of the undertow, so if we have a look at a sensor which is near the bottom, we can see a concentration of sediment which is with variation which are more or less correlated to the gravity waves. But if you look at the upper sensor, which is where there is no undertow, you can see also variation of the concentrations. And this variation of the concentration, then near the surface, they are due to wave breaking. As you can see, they happen when the velocity is higher. And we can see it's something you can notice at the beach. So here are two photos. So one is a holistic case. So those are plunging breakers, and you can see a large concentration of sediment just after the breaking point. And on the right, it's a flume experiment. And you can see there, it's also the same kind of breaker, a plunging breaker. And you can see that there is a large concentration appearing just after the breaking point. So, and this concentration is driven by the turbulence induced by wave breaking. And still, to try to explain a bit this breaking effect, we got, so here we got two forces in a different direction at the breaking point. So we have the stress of the wave, which is going toward the shore, and we have the gravity force, which impulses a force which is going offshore. So the balance of these two give two opposite effects. So something towards the shore at the surface, and something and a return layer at the bottom. So at the end, this effect is pretty difficult to have the overall transport direction if we integrate everything. And actually, so this sediment transport is something, or this sediment transport by breaking, something which is very difficult to assess because measurements are difficult to do in the breaking area. So it's not possible to put an instrument there. But we consider that in general that with a lot of breaking waves, we will have some offshore transport. And with few breaking waves, we will have some onshore transport. And finally, if we move really toward the shore, so we reach an area where which can be sometimes dry, sometimes wet. So we still have, well, after the breaking point, so we still have different phenomena happening there. So we still have an influence there of infragravity waves. We still have an undertow. and we have a varying concentration of various concentration of sediment there. So in this swash zone, so by swash zone, I mean the area which is alternatively dry and wet. So it's the one that you can see at the when you're walking along the beach, and sometimes you get wet. So the water motion is dominated by infragravity waves. So very low frequency movement of the water, and there is also a large concentration of sediment there, and this concentration come from the breaking waves just before, at the point before. So sediment transport there is unclear. It's difficult here to measure, and a few measurements are unclear about what's happened there, but there is some erosion and transport there. So finally, as a summary of what is happening for the transport, cross-shore transport, there is a large spectrum of phenomena happening, and they are linked to waves and the energy of the wave, and they are strongly linked also to the depth. So offshore, so at the depth of closure, we have no transport. When we're going toward the shore, we have a little transport, which are due to ripples, so interaction with the bed form, and which are due also to the skewness of the wave. But when we go still onshore in the shoaling zone, so just before when waves are shoaling just before breaking, there's some onshore transport. Then in the breaking area, we got a mix of onshore, offshore transport. And at the end, in the swash area, we got also on and offshore transport. And you can notice that the transport increase from offshore to onshore. And if you consider longer term, this is strongly related to waves. So actually the location of A and D points can shift. There can be a kind of migration of the beach depending on the wave condition. So the beach by itself, I mean the morphology of the beach is something dynamic, and it's very different of what we are doing when we are doing open ocean modeling. We have to take this into account. And also it's the same it is the case for modeling, so it's the case for experiment. If we put experiment during a full year, we can have pretty different phenomenon happening at the same location because the beach is shifting. And an open question is, well, what is dominant in the erosion distribution of the sediment? Are these the very energetic storm happening from time to time, or is it the frequent low energy condition with a continuous action? And this is something which is pretty open. And in terms of cross-shore, the particular case when the transport is not really due to waves is a case of rip currents. So rip currents, as you can see on the photo, they happen when there is a channel between two bars. So between two sandbars, so the waves are breaking on the sandbar. Is what you can see here, what capping on the bar, and then there is a return flow, which is going offshore with a very high velocity. So here the main driver is the mean flow, so this rip current, and the sediment is exported offshore. And then if we move toward longshore transport, so transport in the direction parallel to the beach, so we have very different phenomenon there. We don't have bed load because bed load is happening in the direction of the waves, but we still have the wave which are steering the sediment which is already in the water column. And there is there can be a strong littoral drift, which is due to breaking waves and then a longshore current. So there are different drivers leading the longshore drift. So the beach drifting due to swash, we'll come back on this just after. Transport by Stokes drift and transport by wind also and by residual tidal currents. So about the phenomenon of beach drifting. So it happened in the swash area, so the area where the sand is alternatively wet and dry. So what happened there if we have waves with an angle to the shore? So waves are coming with an angle to the shore, but the backwash, so the water is going down due to gravity. So the waves are coming with an angle, but are going down perpendicular to the beach. So the sand which is transported is not going back to the same location, and is put in and is stay on suspension, and then there is strong drift due to the wave breaking currents. It's what we can see. So we can see on the pictures at the bottom left. So we can see an example of a swash and backwash with a kind of tooth form. So with the swash with an angle to the beach and the backwash perpendicular to the beach. And then on the left, we can see the migration of the sand. So the sand is coming from the left side of the area, from the left side of the photo, and it is eroded, it's transported, and this creates this kind of tongue, this kind of spit, which was not there a long time ago, and then the full beach is transported and is moving at a very long, during very long period of time. So, and in the third, what happened in the third zone, the Longshore direction, so there is no transport due to wave. There is some sediment motion due to breaking induced current, and then there is a longshore drift due to a wave breaking current, something tide, sometimes tide or drift. So here it's an example. So at the left, it's an environment with a very low longshore drift. Because here we got the presence of 3 consecutive bars. So the swash zone is very small. The waves are dissipating a lot of energy before breaking on the shore. And on the right, it's an area with a strong shore drift because there is this kind of construction there. So the longshore drift is happening from up the picture to the bottom, and we can see this accumulation of sediment just before the construction. So, and in terms of prediction, there are some empirical formula to compute this longshore transport. So if we assume that it is correlated with the longshore wave energy flux, so this is this formula where HB the wave high, and you can see that if the waves are normal to the shore, the longshore transport then is 0. That also transport is increasing when wave height is increasing, and that longshore transport is maximum where the angle of incidence of the wave is 45 degrees. And then a few words about sediment balance. So sediment balance, it's obvious, it's the budget between the different source and sink of sediment. So you got as a source of sediment, you have the sand coming from the shore, and as a sink, you have the sand exported offshore. But you, as a source, you also have a longshore some transport. You have some loss of sediment in canyon that exchange with estuaries, so a large number of sources. And then the bed level, so the morphodynamics, is the reflect of the gradient of the sediment transport rate. And this gives us an equation to determine the variation of the depth, so the variation of the bed, which is called the Exner equation. I will talk about this equation when I move toward the model description. So in conclusion, there is a wide range of complex phenomena which are happening for sand transport in a nearshore environment. They're happening at different scales, at different locations. The main drivers are waves and water level, even if there can be an influence of tides and wind. And it's very complex because it's very hard to observe, so it's also very hard to model and to assess. And on some phenomenon like below, there is no real consensus about what is happening. And you also have to keep in mind that this is a very fast review. It is not exhaustive. So it is not exhaustive for sand in nearshore itself. But in addition, I'm not talking about cohesive sediments and aggregation of sediments in the water column. I'm not talking of gravels. I'm not talking of the other environments where there are a lot of things happening in mangrove, estuaries, and so on. And the reason why is because for now our activities, mainly so Guillaume, Patrick, and I, we have been focused on nearshore environment and sandy environment. But it doesn't mean that we do not plan to do it with CROCO. And this doesn't mean either that it's not possible to do it with CROCO. It just means that it's not, and I would say, validated a lot with CROCO. So this is it for this general talk about sediment.
Thank you, Rachid. Questions? Comments, experience? Joseph?
Hi, Rachid. Thank you very much for the talk. So I have two quick questions. The first one is when you were talking about, those regions A to E,
yeah.
And then I think around D or C where there's transport. I was wondering if over time that leads to changes in the structure of that zone because of the transport of the sediments. A second question, which is more general, is what are some of the applications or uses? Maybe you mentioned it, but I don't know, of this type of studies of sediment transport or modeling them.
So,
thank you.
So the first question, well, actually, it's pretty difficult to give a time, because if you imagine a rate of change, because if you imagine the case of storm, this area will be changed very quickly, in one day. So with a storm, it will be eroded very quickly. And then there will be a slow reconstruction during low energy condition. So then I would say maybe saying that beach profile can change at a daily scale. Maybe not too stupid, but yes, it depends a lot of the wave conditions. Not sure if it's clear or.
Yes, it's clear.
And I forgot your second questions.
The second one was basically the general applications or uses of modeling this type of waves or sediment transport.
Well, there are different things. I have some example after, but let's say we had we used it, for instance, for very applied projects. For instance, what happened if you put a construction somewhere to prevent beach erosion?
Okay.
For instance, I was showing a longshore drift. So what happened, for instance, if we destroy this construction? It's something that you can do with a model, basically.
Okay.
You see, or this one, what happens if you put a construction there because you don't want this part to be eroded? So this is a very practical application. Then for me, I moved towards sediment because I was interested in waves and in wave current interaction. And if you go near shore and if the beach morphology is changing, you have to model also the change of beach morphology.
Mm.
You see, otherwise your
Yeah.
bathymetry gets so wrong. So that's why I moved toward this.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But yeah, I think there are a lot of applications. But we use it a lot. Yes, for practical application, or try to understand the phenomenon driving erosion in some area and so on. Voilà.
Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Thank you, Rachid. Let's take a 10-minute break, and then we start the second presentation.
Yep, perfect.
Okay, we'll stop this, and in 10 minutes,